September 9th, 2025. Israeli jets strike Doha, Qatar, home to the largest American air base in the Middle East. 8 days later, Saudi Arabia signs a mutual defense pact with the nuclear-armed Pakistan. 6 months after that, Pakistani fighter jets land on Saudi soil, and 2 more countries are negotiating to join. Commentators have a name for this, an Islamic NATO. We'll take a look at what's actually being built now, because the most surprising thing on this map isn't who's joining, it's the crack on the other side. Between 2 countries everyone assumed were allies. Here's the strange part. This pact took years to negotiate. So why was it signed 8 days after an airstrike? To answer that, you need to know what the strike on Doha actually broke. Qatar isn't just any Gulf state. It hosts Al Udeid, roughly 10,000 American personnel, the biggest U.S. base in the region. The assumption across the Gulf had always been simple: host American forces and you're under American protection. Then the missiles landed anyway, and every capital in the region quietly asked the same question. If Qatar can be struck, who's next? For Saudi Arabia, this wasn't a new doubt. It was a confirmed one. In 2019, drone and missile attacks blamed on Iran knocked out roughly half the kingdom's oil output for days. Washington's response? Condemnation. Then earlier in 2025, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman asked President Trump directly for a binding security guarantee, a written promise to defend the kingdom. He didn't get one. He got a $142 billion arms deal instead. Weapons, yes. A commitment, no. So on September 17, 2025, 8 days after Doha, the Crown Prince welcomed Pakistan's Prime Minister to Riyadh, and the two signed what they called the Strategic Mutual Defense Agreement. One sentence in it carries all the weight. Any aggression against either country shall be considered an aggression against both. If that sounds familiar, it should. It's the same logic as NATO's Article 5. Now, the honest version? This deal had been in the works for years. Everyone tracking it agrees on that. What changed was the timing. Announcing it 8 days after Doha turned a quiet bilateral arrangement into a public signal, aimed, analysts say, at deterring a nuclear-armed Israel as much as Iran. And Pakistan brought the one thing no arms deal can include. It is the only nuclear-armed Muslim-majority country on Earth, and several analysts now describe Saudi deterrence doctrine as resting on access to a nuclear umbrella. On paper, historic. But here's the thing about defense pacts: most of them die as paper. This one was about to be tested, fast. February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launch a massive air campaign against Iran. Iran's supreme leader is killed. Tehran retaliates against Israel, against U.S. bases, against Gulf states, and shuts the Strait of Hormuz, the channel carrying a fifth of the world's oil. Within weeks, a regional crisis becomes a global one. In early March, Iranian missiles and drones strike Saudi Arabia itself. Watch what happens next, because this is the moment the pact stopped being theoretical. Pakistan's military chief, Field Marshal Asim Munir, flies to Riyadh on an emergency visit. The official readout uses very deliberate words. The two sides discuss joint measures within the framework of their Strategic Mutual Defense Agreement. Translation: the clause is live. Then April, Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Defense announces that a Pakistani military force, fighter jets, and support aircraft has arrived at King Abdulaziz Air Base. Read that again. 7 months after a signature in a palace, Pakistani combat aircraft are stationed inside the kingdom, under the pact. Defense agreements get signed every year. Fighter squadrons moving because of one? That's rare. And while its jets deployed, Pakistan pulled off something even more unusual. It became the room where the war went to end. The April ceasefire between Washington and Tehran was brokered by Islamabad. Days later, a U.S. delegation led by the vice president met Iranian officials in Pakistan's capital, the highest-level contact between the two countries since 1979. Added up, in 6 months, Pakistan went from signing a paper in Riyadh to basing jets there. to hosting America's negotiations with Iran. A country that spent recent years in economic crisis suddenly holds one of the strongest hands in the region, not because its economy changed, but because what it sells became priceless, credible protection. And once the pact proved real, the question changed. Not will it hold, but who joins next? In January 2026, Bloomberg put a NATO member into the story. Turkey, it reported, was in advanced talks to join, and a deal was considered likely. Pakistan's Minister for Defense Production confirmed a draft three-way agreement existed. Turkey's foreign minister was more careful. Talks are underway, he said, but no agreement has yet been signed. Keep that nuance. It matters for the ending. Then in May, Pakistan's defense minister went further on live television. Turkey and Qatar could both join, he said. The arrangement is being finalized. If Qatar and Turkey also join this existing agreement, it will be a welcome development. So why these four? Because together, they cover every input a military bloc needs. Think of it as a division of labor. Pakistan brings deterrence and manpower for the nuclear arsenal and one of the largest battle-tested armies anywhere. Saudi Arabia brings money and an ambition. Under Vision 2030, Riyadh doesn't just want to buy weapons anymore, it wants to build them. Qatar brings position, and here's the irony, it hosts the biggest American base in the region and a Turkish base in the same small country. Doha hedges for a living, and Turkey brings the factory, NATO's second largest army, and a defense industry that now exports. Its flagship is KAAN, a fifth-generation stealth fighter. Here's the part that makes the story. KAAN exists because in 2019, the United States expelled Turkey from the F-35 program, so Turkey built its own. And in February 2026, that jet appeared at the World Defense Show in Riyadh, wearing Saudi markings. The head of Turkish Aerospace says talks with Saudi Arabia have reached the final and highest level. Earlier reports mentioned up to 100 aircraft. Washington has noticed. U.S. officials are reportedly pressing Riyadh, worried the deal cuts into America's share of the Saudi arms market. Follow the loop. America removes Turkey from its fighter program. Turkey builds a rival fighter and now negotiates to sell it to America's biggest arms customer. Inside a defense framework America isn't part of. Strategic autonomy isn't a speech, it's a supply chain. That's one side of the map. Now here's the part almost nobody puts in the same discussion. While these four were drafting documents, two other countries were already operating. During the Iran war, the United Arab Emirates was hit hard. Waves of Iranian missiles and drones targeting its cities and energy infrastructure. What happened next had never happened before. Axios reported it first. CNN confirmed it. Israel deployed an Iron Dome battery to the UAE with Israeli personnel to operate it, the first time the system has ever been stationed outside Israel or the United States. According to the European Council on Foreign Relations, Israeli systems intercepted over 95% of the projectiles aimed at the Emirates, and this wasn't charity. An Israeli security source told CNN that the UAE shares signals intelligence with Israel in return, and that Israel actually had to refuse a request for more batteries, because every battery in the Gulf is one less defending Tel Aviv. Sources also say the two have set up a joint fund to buy weapons together. So while one side of the map was negotiating an alliance, the other side was already running one. Then came April 28th. The UAE announced it was leaving OPEC and OPEC Plus after nearly 6 decades. The oil cartel that Saudi Arabia has led in practice lost a core member in the middle of an oil shock. That same day, Gulf leaders held an unscheduled meeting, and rumors swirled that Abu Dhabi might quit the Gulf Cooperation Council itself. It didn't. But the fact that serious people considered it possible tells you how deep the crack runs. And the crack isn't just institutional. December 30th, 2025, Saudi aircraft strike positions in Yemen linked to forces backed by the UAE. Read that sentence again. Saudi jets hitting their decade-long partners' proxies. Gulf disputes are traditionally settled in silence behind palace doors. This one went public and kinetic. The financial ties frayed too. After Abu Dhabi demanded repayment, Pakistan reportedly cleared $3.45 billion in debt to the UAE within months. The IISS puts it diplomatically. UAE ties with its old partners have come under strain. Now step back and look at the whole board. The deepest split on this map is not between Muslim-majority states and Israel. It runs through the Gulf itself, between Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, two capitals everyone assumed were permanent partners. And the sorting principle isn't religion, language, or history. It's two questions. Who guarantees your security when the missiles fly? And who funds your budget when they don't? Saudi Arabia answered with Pakistan. The UAE answered with Israel, same threat, opposite bets, which leaves one country holding the most expensive undecided vote in the region. Egypt has the largest army in the Arab world and an economy that runs on other people's money. Both sides know it, and both sides are bidding. Look at the ledger, compiled by the International Crisis Group. The UAE injected $35 billion into Egypt through a single real estate megadeal. Saudi Arabia parked $5.3 billion at Egypt's central bank, Kuwait $4 billion, and Qatar has now committed $29.7 billion to a property deal of its own. Gulf money, in the crisis group's words, is effectively keeping the Egyptian state solvent. The pound has slid from 48 to 55 against the dollar since the war began, inflation runs above 15%, and Suez Canal revenue has cratered. Historically, the biggest checks came from Abu Dhabi, which placed Egypt on the UAE's side of the board. But watch the frictions pile up. Crisis Group reports Cairo is nervous about an emboldened Israel on its northeastern border, and in Sudan, Egypt's southern neighbor Cairo backs the army, while the force fighting it is propped up, in one analyst's words, almost exclusively by the UAE, opposite sides of a war next door. And then there's the Turkey signal. In September 2025, Turkish and Egyptian warships held their first joint naval exercise in 13 years. Since then, a deal to co-produce military drones in Egypt, and reports that Cairo could take a role in building KAAN itself. A retired Israeli general wrote in Maariv that Israel could one day face a difficult war against an Egyptian-Turkish alignment. That's not our assessment. That's the worry being printed in Israel. Officially, the bloc's fourth chair belongs to Qatar, but look at who's actually in the meeting rooms. Egypt's foreign minister sat down with Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey 3 times this spring, in Riyadh, in Islamabad, in Antalya. And in April, something happened that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. Egyptian forces trained alongside Turkish troops in Sirte, Libya, the same country where Ankara and Cairo once backed opposite sides of a civil war. How those two went from proxy enemies to joint drills on Libyan soil is a story that deserves its own video. So, 4 countries drafting, 2 countries operating, 1 giant deciding. Time to answer the question in the title. So, is this an Islamic NATO? Measured against the real NATO, no. There is no charter, no joint command. The only signed mutual defense clause is bilateral between Riyadh and Islamabad. Turkey hasn't signed anything. Its own foreign minister says so, and it remains a member of the actual NATO, which makes a second Article 5 legally and politically awkward. Veteran analysts call these alignments fluid, ad hoc, and largely unsustainable. The IISS expects a coordination club, not an alliance. But no isn't the full answer either, because paper alliances don't usually move fighter squadrons. A nuclear-armed state put a defense clause in writing, then put jets behind it. A NATO member is negotiating its way into a second framework. OPEC lost a member. Gulf partners traded airstrikes through proxies. So here's the honest answer: it's the wrong question. The thing being built isn't organized around Islam at all. Look at the sorting. The Muslim-majority UAE chose Israel's interceptors. Muslim-majority Egypt is being courted by both sides at once. What's actually forming is a market for security guarantees, where the old monopoly supplier, the United States, is no longer trusted to deliver, and everyone is shopping. Some buy Pakistani deterrents, some buy Israeli interceptors. The label says religion, the ledger says risk, 8 days. That's how long it took after Doha for the first contract in this new market to be signed. The next signature, whoever writes it, will tell you which way this map breaks. If you want the Libya story, how Turkey and Egypt went from enemies to joint exercises, that map is next on this channel. And a question for the comment section, analysts, which lasts longer, a pact on paper or a partnership that's never signed?